Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional league, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Welcome, everyone, to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeff Malinoff, and with me, once again, is Marc Sousa. And we're going to talk fantasy football, obviously, but we're going to start with our first one. We're going to talk about Mitchell Trubisky and his unreal day that I don't think anyone expected. And then we're going to go on with more quarterbacks in that segment. Then we're going to go on to other topics such as running backs and who is the best running back in the league right now. Alvin Kamara, spoilers. And then we'll go on to more receivers and defenses and see how things go on. And then the last segment, we'll talk about anything else we missed. So we'll start off with the Bears and Mitchell Trubisky. Threw 6 touchdowns this week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the former best offense of the league, I guess you could say now. Wouldn't you say so?
Yeah, no more Fitz magic. It's now Trubisky magic. I don't.
That's just not magic because I think that's a curse at the moment. So, would you say you would drop Fitzpatrick right now if you have him?
I would most likely drop him. Maybe you stick with him, but
Winston. Do you think Winston's going to take the starting job?
Yes. He's their franchise quarterback. I think
he gets in trouble a lot, though. He has problems with the law, and that would I would take that with a grain of salt.
Right. I mean, Winston. All reports are that he's been very professional throughout this entire thing. I understand, the concern for off the field. I would not want to put a lot of stock into picking up Jameis Winston if he's available.
Maybe just avoid Tampa Bay Buccaneer quarterbacks.
I think what we saw from Fitzpatrick was more indicative of Tampa Bay's offense kind of being a flash in the pan. A couple weeks. They have the
Do you think it was a fluke?
Yeah.
Whoa, voice crack. I don't think anyone else got that by me, but voice crack.
I see it as a fluke. I mean, they have talent. They have players like...
Fluke is a strong... Maybe fluke is a strong word for me, but maybe just a one-hit wonder.
Right. So Deshaun Jackson... He
has that every other couple of years. Sorry to interrupt again, but he has that every couple of years.
Yeah, and it's a combination of Fitzpatrick. He can get hot, and then he can go super cold, and that's kind of been his career. As a journeyman, backup, starter, whatever you want to call him, he's been in and out of lineups. For those reasons, he hasn't been able to maintain consistently solid play, and then he gets replaced. So I see that, but I also see the Bucs offense being conducive to that because they have talent.
Ooh, conducive, big word.
They have talent. Deshaun Jackson, Mike Evans, Godwin, those are players. O.J. Howard, they have athletes there that can get behind defenses, that can put up big numbers, but...
Honestly, if Mike Evans was on another team with a good quarterback, he could put up some huge numbers.
Right.
But he's unfortunately on a team with a very lackluster quarterback.
And I would say that that's the reason why I am not high on picking up Jameis Winston from the waiver wire, and I'm okay with dropping Fitzpatrick because I just don't think the Bucs offense is going to be that good the rest of the season.
Okay, here's a very important question. Trubisky, do you pick him up after this one game?
I believe he's on a bye week this week. He will be a popular ad. However, the bye week does kind of hamper that a little bit. Mm-hmm. I would pick him up. I would say that if you're in a league where there's if it's an auction waiver wire, I wouldn't put too much into him just because I think Tampa Bay's defense was just not even present yesterday. I would say that Trubisky played great. He made the throws that he needed to make, but a lot of those plays are just wide open plays. I think Nagy's a really good play caller, but I'm just not sold on Trubisky being a confident, solid pick at quarterback starting for your team every week. So if you pick him up as like a backup, maybe your second quarterback, you want to ride it out and see how he does.
Would you still hold up like on taking him and just put him in your team in general?
I would not start him unless
maybe
he shows
not start,
again.
but like, would you replace him with a backup quarterback you have? Like, would you replace him with any other potential backup quarterbacks you have?
I mean, yeah, obviously.
Like, if you had Mariota as your backup, would you replace him with Trubisky?
No.
No?
I'd keep Mariota.
Mariota had some accuracy issues going into that game. He did play well, but if you see that pass to Davis at the end of the game, on that overtime game, he didn't need to throw the ball that high in the air. All he needed to do was throw it to the right, to the opposite side of the defender, and that's not an issue to catch the ball. He kind of got too excited and tried to almost overthrew the guy.
Yeah, no, I agree. We're talking about two quarterbacks that will probably be very maddening to own in fantasy. That's why I'm going to lean Mariota, though, just because I think that he can maintain a level of consistency that I'm not sure that Trubisky can. So until I see that Trubisky has taken the next step in his career, I am going to hold Mariota and not pick up a guy like Trubisky if those are my two options.
Okay, let's just talk about some other quarterbacks that are probably available. Like David Carr, he had a pretty good game with 45 points. Would he be a guy you think has an uprising rest of the season? Do you see him getting taken in the waivers?
Well, you said David Carr, but I think you meant Derek Carr.
Oh God, did I say David Carr? Oh my, that's a 2002 blunder right there. My Lord, I am so sorry.
Oh no, it's totally fine.
They're both. Anyways,
so I'm looking at Derek Carr's last
maybe
four.
Some controversy what I just said.
I'm looking at Derek Carr's first 4 games this year, and I'll give you the point.
Can I just stop you there? Hey, parents, don't name your kids so close to each other so I don't get that mixed up again. Thank you.
So he started off against
Derek Carr and David Carr.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm right. Yeah. So parents, think about that for a second. Anyways, continue.
So week 1, Derek Carr against the Rams, 3 interceptions, no touchdowns, 6 fantasy points. Week 2,
granted, the Rams are a great defense.
Okay, I'll give you that. Week 2 against Denver, 17 fantasy points, 1 touchdown, no interceptions, no.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty bad.
Week 3 at Miami, 345 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, only 15 fantasy points. And then we have yesterday's breakout, 39 fantasy points game, 437 yards, 4 touchdowns. He did throw 2 interceptions in that game, but ultimately, if you did play Derek Carr yesterday, you were very satisfied with the 39-point output. With that being said, you asked if I would pick him up for the rest of the season. His next 2 games are at L.A. Chargers, not the Rams, and Seattle. I'm not sure. And then he has a bye week. I'm still not sure.
With Seattle's defense losing Earl Thomas and being how, I wouldn't say pitiful, but how deproved they are. No, not improved. They were deproving. And he could do some damage against Seattle. The Chargers, possibly. I mean, C.J. Beathard had a pretty good game against them, all things considered, for what he had around him. So I wouldn't put him as my starter, but I would consider him as a backup. I know we're talking about all these guys as sorry to interrupt again, but
no,
I'm talking about just all guys. We're talking about backup quarterback potential, not.
I think Derek Carr could.
Excuse me.
He could be good next week. The Chargers game, yes, they gave up some passes to C.J. Beathard yesterday, and I think Derek Carr is more talented than C.J. Beathard.
I agree with that.
But what I really like about that matchup is it probably should be a lot of points scored in that game. So I would expect to see maybe something like yesterday's Raider game where it was 45-42. Maybe it's a 38-31 game, and the Raiders lose.
Sounds very exact estimate.
Yeah, I'm saying maybe it's... I would say whatever the over-under is in that game, take the over, more than likely.
Okay.
because I could see
that sounds good to all fantasy owners right there, taking the over on
exactly.
that one.
So when you're looking at fantasy football and you're looking at quarterbacks and things like that, point total is a big one, right? I mean, you want a quarterback.
You don't care about who wins and loses
right.
in fantasy. You care about the points.
You want the quarterback in the 45-35 game, not the one that's 22-0, whatever the
22-0 in the Packers
Bills game.
Unless you have Rodgers, who didn't even play that well, but would you bench Rodgers right now, or do you still think he can improve? Because he's been struggling too.
I mean, it's one of those things that if you drafted Aaron Rodgers, you spent a really high pick on him, and I say really high.
Granted, he deserved it.
Right. He definitely deserves it.
He's probably the most talented quarterback in the league at the moment.
Absolutely. But it's hard to not play him. Like, what I'm saying is,
I know exactly what you mean.
If you drafted him, and let's say you draft him the 3rd or 4th round of your fantasy league, you're not going to... If he's playing football, you're going to start him. Yes, you want a healthy Aaron Rodgers, but what would your backup be? Unless you drafted, like, let's say Mahomes, you got lucky and drafted Mahomes, okay?
I would still think he'd be a starting quarterback just because of the offense around him. Because Tyreek Hill is no joke.
Absolutely. So let's just say for a second, if you drafted 2 quarterbacks and one of them is Aaron Rodgers, your second one was a guy you probably took a flyer on. So it was like a Mahomes, right? Or maybe a Baker Mayfield or something like that, right? So maybe a Derek Carr. I don't know.
Baker Mayfield wasn't even going to be the starter, so he probably is still in waivers. And
sure.
Well, probably maybe after the Jets game, he's probably not in waivers as much as he is anymore. But I could still see him in waivers in some leagues.
Right, so...
Because it's the Browns. people still have that bitter taste in their mouth about the Browns. I mean, 0-16 last year still haunts them.
So right now, Aaron Rodgers is the 11th ranked quarterback in fantasy football. His point output is 30, 17, 23, and 16. Not exactly what you paid for when you drafted him with a 3rd or 4th round pick.
Again, it's 4 weeks. That's why I'm being hesitant about that.
So here's my point.
Oh, okay. Continue.
Next week, they play Detroit in Detroit. So on turf,
ooh,
you got to start Rodgers in that match.
Yeah,
you got to
you
like
do.
it.
Yeah,
you got to like it.
You really do. Rodgers eats Lions for breakfast.
And
all due respect to Lions fans, but he owns that team.
And we're talking about point totals just a second ago. That's going to be a game that's going to have a high point total because Detroit can score points, but they allow points. The Packers
same thing with the Pack. The Packers are the exact. This is an identical team thing. Good offense that can get points, defense that can't stop anybody.
Right. So
they probably those up there. If you have them on defense, do not play them. If you do, I don't know why you picked them, but you should avoid them at all cost.
So Aaron Rodgers' next 2 games are at Detroit and home against the 49ers, and then he has a bye week.
Home in Lambeau against 49ers?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that secondary is pretty bad also. But I could still see that also as a high-scoring game, considering the
Possibly.
Niners. The 49ers with Kyle Shanahan, even if they don't have the good talent around, they can still put points on the board. I mean, it showed.
Possibly, yeah. I
mean, they still got 26 points last week, this week against the Chargers, and they have a pretty decent defense.
I agree with you. I think that if we're looking at it
as a backup.
Yeah. I think if we're looking at it, if we're breaking down those 2 games, you want Rodgers definitely against the Lions, and I mean, you're going to play him against the Niners. Like, you're just going to play him.
But if I'm a guy who owns like a Niners player, I'm definitely feeling good. Even if they're playing bad, they're still putting a lot of points on the board.
Yeah, their offense yesterday looked like it can be functional and be conducive to fantasy football players like Goodwin,
they're
Kittle.
Averaging like 20-something points, like 25, 28 points a game.
Yeah.
Because they lost the Vikings and it was 20-some odd points they had. I think. I know against the Lions they had 30. And against the Chiefs they had 28, excuse me. And this week they had 24. 27. 27-29, I believe was the final score. Mm-hmm. So they put points on the board.
Yeah, you're liking it, especially if you picked up Breida, or if you invested.
I think Breida is kind of injury prone, but if you have those 2 running backs, they're getting the ball a lot. Alfred Morris and Matt Breida.
Right.
And there's also talks of them trading for Le'Veon Bell. If that happens, then definitely get Le'Veon on that team.
They won't do it, but
I'm saying hypothetically. Let's just go hypothetical. If he is on that team, that offense improves even more than it is now with the lack of talent they have.
Absolutely. I mean, Le'Veon
That
Bell
might
will
turn the
improve
team
it.
around. I'm not saying they're going to win the Super Bowl or anything. Maybe not even playoffs, but like right now without Garoppolo, people are thinking, oh, like 3-13, which just makes sense of how they're playing. They're not finishing games, but with Le'Veon, they can get a couple more wins on their belt.
The problem with the Niners' schedule is it's brutal through the first 8
rough.
games. Like, they got to go play the Rams and the Packers in back-to-back primetime games here in a couple weeks.
True, but I think they're still in a rebuilding period regardless.
No, absolutely. So
I give them 2 more years.
What I'm saying is there's still fantasy value with the 49ers weapons, but it might need to be tempered when they play games like they're going to be playing here in the future.
Okay, that makes sense. I do agree that the 49ers offense, even if they're not winning games, they're still performing at a high level. Mm-hmm. So I would definitely say hold on to those 49er weapons, especially like Kittle and Breida. I think those are the main 2.
Kittle had a big game yesterday.
Kittle had a big 82-yard. I think that was the longest play from scrimmage this season so far. Mm-hmm. So I would definitely put up Kittle and Breida as one of my main starters on my teams if I had them. But if you had would you pick up C.J. Beathard as a starter if you're on a bye week with another quarterback?
No.
I
mean, obviously it depends on your options, but
not in a keeper league. Obviously, he's kind of that's not smart. But
okay, so let me ask you this.
Okay, go for it.
I'll give you 3 or 4 quarterbacks here that maybe some leagues that the people listening, these players aren't available, but these are guys that are probably 50% or less owned. I would say Derek Carr or C.J. Beathard.
Derek Carr or C.J. Beathard.
Obviously, obviously there's other factors, opponent, injuries, and things like that. But let's just take it for what it's worth. If you have let's say the opponent is middle of the road for all these quarterbacks, all things are equal. Okay, Derek Carr or C.J. Beathard.
Based on talent around Beathard, I'm going to go Beathard.
Okay.
I think he has a better talent around him. I know that's a probably controversial decision, but he played pretty well, all things considered.
Okay. I'll fire another one at you. Mariota.
Over Carr?
Over Beathard.
Over Beathard. Mariota.
Bortles.
I would pick Bortles.
Flacco.
Bortles.
No, Flacco.
Over Beathard? Oh, I thought we were going a little game here. Beathard.
Okay. I might agree with you on that one. Dak.
Beathard.
Okay. And
Dak's kind of losing it. He's kind of on a slump at the moment.
Okay. I don't I disagree with you on the Derek Carr one just because I think the Raiders will move the ball down the field more consistently than the Niners will, and I think that the Raiders just their defense gives up a lot of points, but not that the Niners have a great defense or anything like that.
Their front seven's kind of okay.
Yeah.
Like, Buckner has been playing relatively well. Reuben Foster is getting back into it.
I think Beathard is a fine starter, like, if you needed one in a pinch, right? Like, let's say...
They got a return. They got an interception touchdown last game. Like, they can play relatively decent, but their injuries are really holding them back. Like, I think they're more affected by injuries than any other team in the league.
Oh, yeah. If we're talking
it's hard to deny how much they've lost off injuries right now alone.
And I mean, if you own any 49ers weapons, you're already worried about their status going into the game.
Well, the thing with Garoppolo is he held on to the ball way too long.
Oh, yeah.
In consecutive games. Like, he was getting sacked after like 10 seconds in the pocket.
Right.
But I thought that was a huge, like, red flag.
Well, just fantasy, like, looking at it through the fantasy lens, Goodwin and Breida and Morris already entered the game with injury designations. They played. They got hurt. Because, of course, they did.
They played. They got hurt.
There's a new drinking game out there. I don't know if you're interested, but anytime a 49ers player gets looked at on the field by medical staff, you drink, and I guarantee you by halftime...
you must have been drunk in the last game.
By halftime, you're going to have to go to the liquor store.
There was Staley was the main one.
Pettis
was that one hurt. Goodwin hurt. Those two are the big ones. Well,
Breida.
Breida came back though, and
Right.
Beathard also was checked on medical staff. You would have been. Don't do it in shots.
How about
Just
this?
Do not do that.
And then Richard Sherman obviously didn't play. McKinnon's been out with an ACL.
That
Jimmy
one's just not
Garoppolo
fair.
out for an
I
ACL.
think McKinnon would have improved a lot with the Niners because he's a receiving back, and Kyle Shanahan loves that.
And even McGlinchey, the right tackle, got injured. And
That's
came
the
back
first
in
round
the game.
pick out of Notre Dame.
So it's like, if you can find Niners players that aren't getting hurt, they might be fantasy relevant.
Oh my God! Can you imagine you take shots? So let's see. Let's do that again. Beathard, Breida, Staley, Pettis, Goodwin, and was there another one? McGlinchey. So 6 shots. Do it in sips of beer if you're going to do this drinking game, all things considered. But we're going to take a short break right now. When we get back, we'll talk more about other positions besides the quarterback position, and we'll get right on that when we get back to you.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. We just talked about quarterbacks and a lot more quarterbacks in the 49ers injury drinking game, which I might be playing this next Sunday. Who knows? But we're going to talk about running backs and our studs and duds. Who's your main stud for running backs?
Yeah, so I think we should just call this the Alvin Kamara section of the show.
Yeah.
Can we do that? Because
well, we should add Ezekiel Elliott to that. So how about Zeke and...
So both had great games, but I want to read this to you.
Go for it.
Most fantasy points for any non-quarterback position through the first 4 weeks in the history of the NFL. Now, this is going back and giving fantasy points to players like Jim Brown, right?
Someone went all the way back and gave points to Jim Brown.
Jim Brown, Marvin Harrison, guys like that are on this list. Through the first 4 weeks of fantasy football, Alvin Kamara has the most points ever scored.
Ever scored?
By a non-quarterback.
In this week?
For the first 4 weeks.
Okay.
So if you drafted him, he's not only the number one player so far this year, he's the number one of all time through this part of the season.
That seems interesting, to say the least.
136.1 fantasy points if you go off PPR scoring. That's insane.
Damn.
That is insane.
That including like Jim Brown.
Jim Brown is number 2 on this list at 134. So he beat him by
number 3, just out of curiosity.
Wes Welker in 2011.
Whoa. Well, wait, to 2011. That was with Brady, correct?
Yes, sir.
That was a dominant team.
Emmett Smith in 95 was the 4th.
Pretty sure he broke the all-time rushing record around that time, too.
So,
well, no, that's not true.
So I'm going to sum up the Alvin Kamara appreciation conversation with if you drafted him, you probably got him with like the 5th to 8th pick in your draft, and you were just smiling at everybody who picked Le'Veon Bell. Oh my gosh.
Okay, let's move to Le'Veon Bell. I wouldn't call him a dudder yet because he hasn't played, but would you drop him right now?
You can't drop him. You just can't. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, he's just going to sit on your bench, and you're just going to hate yourself for drafting him because the warning signs were there. You ignored them, and you will now suffer.
Sounds kind of dark, but okay.
Well.
Yeah, it is. It's true. Unfortunately, it's true. But
That sounds dark, but imagine being a Le'Veon Bell owner.
Oh, I'm throwing things. I saw some people pick him for number 1, even with all this talk of him not playing, which I don't understand. I wouldn't have picked him number 1.
I personally know somebody who picked him number 1, and a good friend of mine, and he asked me what I would do heading into the draft, and I said I wouldn't take the running back who might hold out because there's a few really good ones, and I don't want that the possibility of that happening. So,
granted, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, and then he did it anyways. So you gave him this advice, and he did it anyways.
And he's 0-3, and he's about to be 0-4. So,
well, when you pick number 1 pick, and when you have a number 1 pick, and he's not doing jack, then I would be a little upset too.
Exactly. So
that's frustrating. That's frustrating beyond belief.
Right. So, yeah, you can't drop Le'Veon Bell. You just have to kind of roll with the punches, right? So, who's your stud for the weekend?
I gotta go Ezekiel Elliott. 154 yards speaks for this week. Yes, Ezekiel Elliott. If I had to pick all 4 weeks, I gotta go Alvin Kamara myself. But for this week, since you took Kamara, I'll take Ezekiel Elliott. They both had great games. I mean, you can't go wrong with either of them. And Ezekiel Elliott had that huge reception in the last play of the game.
Yeah, he
was all over the field.
I think he had 230 total yards.
Yeah, so you couldn't have gone wrong with either pick.
Ezekiel.
Imagine if you had both. I know that's like impossible because probably they picked back-to-back picks type of thing. Imagine if you had both. Which I could see people kind of missing out on Ezekiel Elliott because of what happened last year and all that kind of stuff. But he's probably a first, second round pick.
Yeah. And then Melvin Gordon had a really good game, 29 fantasy points, consistently putting up numbers.
Would you call Matt Breida a dud? Or do you think injuries that's not fair?
I mean, he had 8.6.
His injuries, I feel like doesn't make it fair.
I think that he's definitely a good
I'm bringing up Matt
player.
Breida because his average is 8.4 yards a carry throughout the first 3 weeks, and that leads the NFL. That led the NFL. I'm not sure if it does anymore. But I think we need to bring him up when it comes to running backs because he was one of the top rushers in the league at one point.
Absolutely. And I think he's a good fill-in starter for you on a week-to-week basis, depending on his injury situation.
If the Niners had McKinnon, would you say he would be playing just as good, if not better, than Breida?
Yes. And I think that they'd be using him in ways that they don't use Breida yet.
Well, Breida's not really a reception back.
I mean, he is for them now, but
he has to be.
Out of necessity.
That's how the offense works. But they got McKinnon because he's a reception back and he's a speed back, and Kyle Shanahan loves to use that in his offense.
Yeah, and then another guy who caught the ball a lot yesterday, and some people liked going into the draft. Tariq Cohen had a big game, 29 fantasy points.
He's not like a first. I don't even put him in the first 5 rounds.
Right, but
that's
some people were high on him. The Bears talked about moving him around in that offense and all that.
Yeah, but you got to also look at the quarterback.
Right, exactly. So I bring up Tariq
and
Cohen.
Howard. Also, Jason Howard is probably important in that situation. Also,
I bring up Tariq Cohen. Him and Mike Davis for the Seattle Seahawks had huge games, and those guys are non-factors most of the time.
Well, the thing is, Mike Davis is like their third-string running back because Penny's their first-round pick, and Carson's their starter. So
right.
Mike Davis should not be getting that many carries when he did, but he got the chance and he improved.
So would you pick up Cohen or Mike Davis?
No.
Okay.
Maybe Cohen, but not Mike Davis.
What about Nick Chubb? He had a big game, 26 fantasy points. He only had 3 carries, but he had 105 yards and 2 touchdowns.
See, when you have 3 carries and 105 yards like that, that's like, you got to take that with like, okay, he's not going to have that kind of game again.
Right.
That's too unreal.
But do you see that game eating into Carlos Hyde's production?
Maybe
carries?
for the next week. We'll see how he does next week. If he doesn't improve for the next week, then I think Carlos Hyde gets then more carries until the next week after that. But I think this next week's going to be a test.
Remember, they did invest a high pick in Chubb. So would you try to get him now before everybody else does, or would you wait and miss the boat?
That's a tough one because I think Carlos Hyde's still going to be the main guy. Carlos Hyde's still going to be the main back for that team. So he's going to get more carries, that's for sure, but I still think Hyde's going to be the number 1 guy.
Yeah.
They invested a lot of money in him.
I agree that Hyde he's the veteran. He's going to get a lot of the carries moving forward, but Chubb getting a lot of production off of the small amount of touches he got yesterday.
I think he's going to get like maybe 8-9 touches next week,
which would be about triple what he normally gets.
Right.
And then after that,
we'll see how he does from there.
Okay.
But I'm still saying Hyde's going to be their number one.
So
Hyde's still going to get like 15 to 20 attempts, I think.
So would you be looking to add Chubb to your team this week or not?
If I'm in a daily fantasy league, yes.
Okay.
But if I'm in a old fashioned fantasy football league, then no.
All right.
I think people keep always betting high on these one game performances and they don't work out usually.
Sure. What about so Todd Gurley had a really good game. I don't really want to talk about him too much. He had his ho-hum 24 points this week. Like that's pretty much like
him and Kamara are the
bed.
number one. Him and Elliott, all those three are just those are the three studs. Who'd you say is the biggest dud?
Biggest dud.
Well, maybe not biggest dud, but most notable. There, perfect word. Most notable dud to you.
All right. I'll tell you exactly who that is.
Oh, I think you already know who that's going to be.
Kenyan Drake.
Kenyan Drake. Oh,
Kenyan Drake is a huge dud that you may consider just dropping here in a couple weeks.
Wow.
Let me read these numbers to you.
Okay, go for it. I'm listening.
All right. So first off, if it doesn't scare you that 87-year-old Frank Gore is taking all the carries in Miami, the next numbers should.
I think this is Gore's last season. That's why he's getting all these touches to try to boost his all-time rushing record.
So Miami is not only. I want you to also think about this in the prism of how well the team's been doing because they're 3-1. So they've been winning these games and leading for most of them. His first game against Tennessee, 14 carries, 48 yards, no touchdowns, 8 fantasy points. Second game against the Jets, 11 carries, 53 yards, and a touchdown. 15 fantasy points, very respectable. Against the Raiders, 5 carries for 3 yards. Against the Patriots, 3 carries for 3 yards. He has 8 carries for 6 yards in his last 2 football games as a starting. And I get it. Sometimes he's
I wouldn't even call him starting. He's sharing the same amount of snaps with Gore.
Right. But let's see. He was, like a consensus 5th, 6th round pick in fantasy football this year. Depending on the size of your league, he probably was a top 50 or 60 player. Would you agree with that?
I would say at the bottom of that top 50, top 60.
Right. But when you draft him, if you draft a player in the first 6 or 7 rounds, you think he's going to be at least a solid starter.
I feel more comfortable for him on my bench.
So let me ask you this. If I told you that through 4 weeks that he would have 27 total fantasy points in 4 games, where would you have drafted him?
Oh, not drafted at all.
Okay, so that's my dud for the week.
27 in 4 weeks?
Yes. And one of those weeks was a 15er, so he got half.
He's averaging like
half.
4 to 5 points a game. It feels like
He's not getting the ball either. So he has 33 carries.
7 times 4 is 20. Yeah, so like 7 points a game.
He's got 33 carries and he has 10 receptions in 4 games. So he has 43 touches in 4 games. That is horrible, and they've been winning most of those games.
Their defense is pretty good, though, with Minkah Fitzpatrick really up that defensive secondary. That's for sure. If you have that Dolphins defense, hold on to them. I know they struggled against New England, but still hold on to that defense, in my opinion.
Yeah, so who's your dud?
Kenyan Drake did have a big dud, but I would say Marshawn Lynch.
Yeah?
Like, he did have 115 yards, but he had one big carry against the Browns, but other than that, like, he's been almost non-existent in that offense.
I disagree.
Really? I haven't seen much of him. Like, he had one beast mode type of run against the Browns, but would you say he gets the ball a lot, but it's like a lot of 2-yard runs?
I agree. I will say that his average isn't that great to start the season, but
would you put him as a starter on your fantasy team?
Yes.
You still would put him as a starter.
Oh.
He's up there in age. He's literally out of retirement. And he's not the same. I feel like he's not the same guy he was in Seattle by a long shot.
Oh, he's not. Oh,
yeah.
He's definitely not. But here, let's let the facts speak for themselves. In a half PPR league, his 4-game point totals are 11.9, 13.8, 16.1, and yesterday 19.2. He didn't score yesterday, and I understand that he is touchdown dependent. I will say that, and you don't like that as a starter.
Well, if with the running back that they love to pound the rock with, he should be their red zone guy.
He's averaging 17 carries a game, and he's getting all the red zone work. He's
not getting in the end zone though.
He has 3 touchdowns.
Barely. If he's getting all those red zone touches, all he gets is 3 touchdowns.
I'm saying that.
How many trips do they have the red zone? How many touches does he have at the red zone?
I don't know.
He must have a let's count. He must have a good 20.
I agree. But if you're getting 60 yards and a touchdown per game from him, that is a very good RB2.
Yeah, but again, the Raiders' line is also very...
Marshawn Lynch is not going to have a game that where he's going to have an Alvin Kamara or Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah, but I might put him as a flex player, but I wouldn't put him as like my main back.
Oh, absolutely not. But if he's your second running back or your flex, you're feeling good with counting on at least 11 or 12 points.
Yeah, but I just think he's like, he has a couple of touchdowns, sure, but he was supposed to be like John. You know, John Gruden loves to pound the rock.
Yes.
And usually everyone's like, okay, so Marshawn Lynch is going to be the guy of the offense. He hasn't really.
Agreed. I agree. And he's not, a lot of his runs, he hasn't had that one run that's like made SportsCenter, like top 10.
He kind of had one against the Browns, but even that was kind of eh.
Yeah, like he's lost a step, like let's be honest.
I think he should have stayed retired, but I understand why he wanted to play for his hometown team. I get that. But I think once they moved to Vegas, he's done for good. Because he said he had no interest in playing in Vegas.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But honestly, I expect more from Marshawn Lynch just based off reputation alone. Like, just about him getting the ball. And, like, he should be getting a lot of red zone touchdowns, not just 3. I feel like if I watch those games and he's getting all those touches in the red zone, they still can't get in the end zone, I'm going to be worried. Because that's a lot of points just off the board right there.
But I think that he's at least lived up to where he was drafted. You probably picked him in like the 6th or 7th round.
I also want to take him in the 2nd round.
Yeah, well, I mean that person,
I think that's just a Raiders fan.
That person in your league is probably not doing very well.
Well, it's not my league. I help my mom with my league. She's in her own little CrossFit league, and she's like, help me out. And I was like, I got you. And I went to her draft day, and I saw someone take Marshawn Lynch. I'm like, it's a very early time to take Marshawn Lynch.
Must be a Raiders fan, I would assume.
Oh, yeah. Well, Northern California, what are you going to do? Well, I think being favoritism with sometimes in fantasy football is okay.
I know we have to move on.
Well, I'll stop you right there. We'll get you right there when we get back. Well, what are you going to say? Just say, advertise it for the next segment.
I'm going to tell you who else is a dud, even more than Marshawn Lynch. Definitely more than Marshawn Lynch.
Well, we'll talk more about duds in the other positions also when we get back.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the Fantasy Football Podcast, and we've talked about quarterbacks, we've talked about duds and the running backs, and you got another big dud. Who's that big dud?
Derrick Henry, Tennessee Titans.
Oh yeah, big time. I would say both. I would say the running backs in Tennessee in general, but I mean, Derrick Henry's just a big bruiser back. I mean, you're not expecting him to outrun people.
Yeah, I think in general, Derrick Henry was probably overdrafted. That people saw that, DeMarco Murray is leaving, so that means that Derrick Henry's getting all the touches. But in reality, they went out and they targeted Dion Lewis. And not only is Dion Lewis catching all the passes out of the backfield for them, but he's also eating into those rushing attempts. And Derrick Henry's a guy who thrives off of volume.
This is true. He does thrive off volume. And he did well in that one playoff game against the Chiefs. But other than that game against the Chiefs, has he had a 100-yard rushing game?
So here are his stats. You ready for him?
Please.
Week 1 against Miami, 10 carries, 26 yards, no touchdowns.
So 2.6 yards a carry. Not that good.
One reception for 5 yards in that game. So
it's probably a check down pass, so nothing spectacular.
So 3.6 points.
Okay.
Houston, week 2.
Well, was he like an early draft pick for you?
I mean, Derrick Henry was a middle, I would say a 4th or a 5th round pick for sure.
A 2-back?
Yeah, an RB2, but a guy that you drafted him expecting like 20 carries a game, getting touchdowns. So week 2 against Houston, 18 carries, 56 yards, no touchdowns, no receptions. Week 3 at Jacksonville, tough game, I understand. 18 carries, 57 yards, no receptions, no touchdowns, 5.7 points. Philadelphia yesterday, 8 carries, 24 yards, 4 points. So he has no touchdowns on the year, and his highest rushing total is 57. His highest points total in a game is 5.8.
That's pretty bad.
What do you do with him? You can't drop him, right? You just got to wait it out?
Maybe try to trade him.
Right, but his value is extremely low right now, so your return won't be very high.
Well, I think anything would improve on this situation with him.
Right,
He's struggled. Heisman Trophy winner, granted, but he's not a speed back, and you need to have speed in the running back position in this league nowadays. You can't really be a bruiser anymore because he can't even break much tackles. Like people still can wrap him up and take him down. Right,
and Dion Lewis just provides, from a real football perspective, Dion Lewis provides such a tougher stop for a defense because you have to take into account that using a linebacker to stop him in the passing game might not be enough. Mm-hmm. Whereas Derrick Henry, you don't need to account for him at all in the passing game, so it makes their offense more dynamic.
You don't really have to count. Well, we just talked about, you can't count him for the running game either.
Exactly. He's not putting up big rushing numbers.
He's not being a threat.
I mean, he's averaging 2.5 yards a carry.
2.5 yards a carry. Come on. And he's supposed to be a bruiser back. Those bruiser backs are supposed to average 4 to 5.
Yeah, and you can't say that he's not getting the ball. I mean, he had 18 carries in back-to-back games where he put up 50 yards. I mean, that's brutal. Mm-hmm. That's you're even surprised that they ran the ball that many times when you consider the limited output.
He is definitely struggling. There's no question about it.
Yeah, so...
But you say to hold on to him, though.
Yeah, I would say hold, just because you can't cut him, because he'll get picked up right away. He gets too many carries to be cut, and I say when he has a big game, let's say he has a breakout game here where he scores a couple touchdowns. The numbers don't even have to be great. Just the fantasy total output needs to be nice. Even if it's 50 yards, but he scores a couple times, then I would try and trade him, get rid of him when his value is higher.
So once he has a good game, then go for a trade?
Yeah, definitely.
Try to get those people that are not really into fantasy football and just are looking at, he played really well, he's going to play good again type of
right.
thing. That's smart. I would agree with that. But again, speaking of Tennessee running backs, Dion Lewis hasn't really been given much of a breakout year like people thought he was going to have.
Yeah, I mean, he had a week 1 game, I know, where he did pretty well. And then week 2 and week 3, he was not that great. But yesterday, he was okay. He had 11 points. If you started him, because he had 9 catches for 66 yards. That's beautiful if that's your flex player or RB2.
That's all you could ask for.
9 receptions for 66 yards.
But comparing him with how he played in not Tennessee, excuse me, how he played with New England, he was a go-to receiver at some points. Him and James White were a dangerous duo.
Yeah.
And now he's not really showing that potential like he did.
Yeah, so he had 19 points the first week, 4 second week, 5 third week, 11 yesterday. So up and down. I could see I see his future in this offense better than Derrick Henry's. I think we know what to expect from Derrick Henry, and I think Dion Lewis will have games where he has 8 or 9 catches, a touchdown, 15 to 20 fantasy points,
Mm-hmm. I can agree with that, definitely.
They play Buffalo next game, too. That'll be interesting to see what their offense looks like against Buffalo, a game they should control. If Derrick Henry has another bad game, that could be really poor for your fantasy team.
That can make you get in trouble. That could cost you some games, I think.
Yeah, so let's talk about wide receivers.
Okay, well, I would love to talk about wide receivers. My main guy right now, who's my stud, is Calvin Ridley.
Yeah,
touchdown machine. I can also put Michael Thomas up there, too. Both of them are studs, but one of us is a touchdown machine, the other is a receiving yards machine.
Yeah.
Would you rather have receiving yards or would you rather have touchdowns?
Give me the yards because the touchdowns are more volatile. So when you were talking about
explode, what's happening with? Oh, you mean they can just go away at any moment?
Right. So Calvin Ridley.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Calvin Ridley, if you take out the touchdowns, he's had some pretty mediocre receiving totals. Now, I'm not saying take out the touchdowns. Of course I'm not, because you want players that get targets in the red zone. You want players that score touchdowns, of course. But I think Calvin Ridley is more of a spot play, a flex play. A guy like Michael Thomas leads the league in targets. You have to just play him, and he's as a consistent receiver as anyone.
Answer me this: who else is on that New Orleans Saints wide receiving core?
Ted Ginn, Cameron Meredith.
My point exactly. They're not go-to receivers. Michael Thomas can catch anything. Ted Ginn is a speed. He's a return man at best, and they don't have anyone else besides Michael Thomas to throw to.
Yeah, I agreed. So Calvin Ridley's your stud of the week.
Oh, stud the last 2 weeks.
Okay. He had a good game yesterday. I definitely started him.
He had multiple touchdown games in back-to-back weeks. That's impressive, especially with Julio Jones on the other end.
I am happy that I picked him up in a couple leagues before he blew up, so then people went to check and then realized.
The thing is with Ridley is everyone thought Matt Ryan threw way more to Julio Jones than anyone else, and he relied way too much on Julio. And now he's throwing to Ridley, and now he's got two weapons instead of just one.
And you know what? That's another reason why I'm not entirely sure that Ridley's going to keep this up, because the Falcons' red zone problems are still there. And there's at some point,
Freeman, we should talk about him, huh?
Yeah, at some point though,
he's a dud.
Julio's going to start scoring touchdowns,
is
and
Freeman
then Ridley's
playing?
not.
Is Freeman hurt?
He's been hurt, yeah.
Oh, then never mind.
I
thought he was playing.
He might be back this week.
Coleman, that's who I was thinking of. Coleman's been a dud.
Yeah, you expected a little bit more from him, but it's one of those things where if Calvin Ridley's going off, somebody's going to suffer, and that's probably Tevin Coleman.
But I honestly think when Devonta Freeman eventually comes back, he's not going to be the same. He's not going to get as many carries as he used to. He had that one good year in 2016, 2015, and I think he is an overrated back. Also, call me crazy.
Freeman?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that
because he had that one good season.
He's kind of a system running
He's a
back.
pedestrian.
Yeah. I feel like Devonta Freeman is kind of like Melvin Gordon, where they're I don't think they're great running backs, but they're just a product of volume. They get the ball all the time in good situations on good offenses, so they're going to produce. If that makes sense. I'm not saying they're not good fantasy players.
Oh yeah,
but I think their
know
fantasy
exactly
value is bigger than their real life value.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Gordon is a fantasy football player,
but I don't think he's that good. I'm not saying he's a terrible player, but I would never say that he's as good.
I wouldn't say he's a top running back in the league. Yeah. I would say he's top 10, but not in the top 5.
He's a product.
I would say 7.
He's a product of great volume on a great offense.
It's weird to say coming from a Charger. You know what I mean? It's like a Chargers team.
Yeah.
But I agree with you on that one. He's in the right place at the right time. He's in the right scheme.
Yeah. My fantasy wide receiver stud of the week.
Wait, I'm going to cut you off right there because we're going to take a little short break, and then we'll get back to your studs once again.
Sounds good.
And we'll get more on that when we get back to you.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the Fantasy Football Podcast. We've talked about quarterbacks, running backs, studs, and duds, and we're holding you in with great anticipation with Mark's stud when it comes to wide receivers. Who is your stud?
I'm going with Cooper Kupp, Los Angeles Rams.
Yeah. Oh, 100% agree with that. Been a beast.
He's a very underrated player, and
I don't think he's going to be underrated anymore. I think he's going to be a go-to from here on out.
I think he's a guy that you should try to get somehow in your league because the Rams' offense is just ridiculous, and Cooper Kupp is their red zone target monster for that team. That's what you want. Maybe the best offense in the league. He's their slot corner or slot receiver.
He broke a lot of tackles on Thursday. That was really impressive against that Minnesota defense.
9 catches, 162, and 2 touchdowns, and that was a beautiful game from him.
Do you know who else has been playing really well? Jordy Nelson.
He has had a rough first 2 weeks, and then last
he
2.
Exploded last 2 weeks. And I thought he's up there in age. I thought this was his last run, but he's improved so much. And these two, I would put as either a flex or a 2 receiver.
Oh yeah,
I could totally see people with Coop and Nelson on their team at the same time. Put them in both.
I think that the problem that you're going to see with Nelson and Cooper has been the problem that's been with Cooper for the last year and a half, and that's inconsistency. I mean, I'm looking at Cooper's numbers right now, and I'll read them off to you. 1 catch, 9 yards. 10 catches, 116 yards. 2 catches, 17 yards.
Do you think because he's covered by their best defender on the defensive side?
I just think that the Raiders provide. I think Marshawn Lynch is consistent, but I think Derek Carr, Amari Cooper, Jared Cook, Jordy Nelson are all going to be players that can any given day put up 20, 25 fantasy points, and on any given day get 2 catches for 15 yards.
True. But I would definitely put my stud for the last couple of weeks as Jordy Nelson.
Yeah, he's
probably had the best. Over the last 2 weeks, probably him and Calvin Ridley are probably the 2 best wide receiver points wise, fantasy points wise. They're 2 probably the best right now going the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, and it was really nice yesterday to see Corey Davis break out. I know
Do you see him doing that again this next week?
Again,
or do you think it's inconsistency?
They're at Buffalo. They're at Buffalo. The problem is that I don't think it's going to be a very high scoring game. So I'm not sure. Do I think he'll get touches? I do. Do I think he'll go 161 a touchdown? Probably not.
Yeah, true. He did play relatively well, granted, but I still think he needs a lot of work to do. I think he still needs to improve, and I still think that he'll get better, no question about it, but I think he's still a work in progress.
Yeah, and we just want to see that chemistry with Mariota build and keep going forward. But I think I would start Corey Davis against Buffalo. I think he's startable. I think that most people probably kept him on the bench the last couple weeks, especially the Jacksonville game, but I think versus Buffalo, depending on your roster, he could be a flex play.
Oh, absolutely. He can totally be a flex player. He should be your flex player.
Yeah.
You think he's still in waivers?
I wouldn't assume that he's on any waiver list. I think he's in ESPN. He's 78% owned. So he is out there in a few leagues. So
if he's out there in your league, I would pick him up, but I wouldn't put him as my number 1.
Yeah.
Get him as your flex. I think he's a perfect flex player.
So I would put a lot of stock. So when I look at receivers, one thing that I like to look at is getting receivers on really good teams rather than really good receivers on bad teams, even if they're the only guy, because I want players like Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, Brandon Cooks on the field. because you know those offenses are going to go up and down the field, scoring points, kicking field goals, but regardless, the yards are there, the touchdowns are there. You just hope that it lands on your guy that you're starting. But those are...
I can see that. I know what you mean by that.
Yeah. So, like, players like Thielen, Diggs, like anybody that you can get in the Vikings offense, you want to get them.
I feel like Diggs got that huge 5-year deal because of that one play in the divisional round against the Saints, and one guy missed the hit stick. That's my personal opinion about that.
He's a really good receiver.
He's getting better, no doubt about it, but you have to admit he got that extension because of that play. He doesn't hit that play, he's not getting that huge extension.
I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't necessarily agree with that, but...
Oh, that's well, you're allowed to have your different opinions. This is America, after all. But
I think Stephon Diggs is going to get paid. Now, it is nice to have that career-defining moment. I'll give you that.
That had to help.
Yeah, it definitely did not hurt.
That probably got him more money.
Yeah, right now Diggs is the number 10 wide receiver in fantasy points. Thielen is number 5, so Thielen is super consistent, whereas Diggs has been a little bit more up and down, but he provides that big playability. So.
Adding Kirk Cousins to that team definitely helps.
Yeah.
Those receivers.
What about Alshon Jeffrey? He's back. He had a big game. 8 catches, 105 yards, and a touchdown.
Yeah, true. But
he's finally back from his shoulder injury, so...
Yeah, he's always been a consistent player, though.
Yeah.
Except for that 1 year in Chicago when he got a PED suspension, but let's not talk about that.
Yeah. AJ Green, that touchdown catch kind of saved his day. He wasn't really producing a whole lot, but that catch obviously helped contribute to his 16 points that he scored.
He is Carson Wentz's go-to receiver, though. Mm-hmm. That happened last year also.
No, I'm talking about AJ Green.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about Alshon Jeffrey. They're like the same guy, though. They play the same type of level. They're both tall. They're both athletic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Man, who is better? I would say they play the same amount. They play the same level. They're probably on the same level.
Between AJ Green and
Alshon Jeffrey.
AJ Green.
Well, I would but they're both like I would put them both as
they're both
one.
good players.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you imagine having both? Oh my! But AJ Green, he's still kind of like his hamstring's still not all there. I think like he was out a lot of the plays because of his injury.
Yeah.
But I would still put him as one of the best wide receivers in the league.
What about a guy who still has not scored a touchdown this year at the receiver position, Odell Beckham Jr.? He's getting the volume. He has. I'll read off the numbers for you. 11 catches, 111 yards in week 1 against Jacksonville, of all teams. Against Dallas, he had 4 catches, 51 yards, so obviously not a great game there. But against Houston, 9 catches, 109 yards. Against the Saints, 7 catches for 60 yards. He also has had 3 rushing attempts this season. They're trying to get him the ball in different ways. Do you think that we'll see some touchdowns coming his way consistently, or do you think he's going to be a player that you just can't rely on a touchdown production?
I'm going to say he's going to be the main guy covered in that offense, and he's going to be the guy they're distracted about and give the other guys an opportunity to score.
Sterling Shepard's been really good.
Exactly my point. If you have Sterling Shepard, play him because he's taking full advantage of people covering Odell Beckham. Mm-hmm. I relate to him. I see him in Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham Jr., that is, in the way where their ego and their confidence overshadows their play.
Yeah. In
ways that, like, defenders get mad at them, like, oh, you're going to be this arrogant player, so we're going to have to we're going to make you wish you didn't play us, blah, 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 blah.
I would say my opinion on this is that if you don't have Odell Beckham, you might want to try trading for him now because I think that he's going to see better days. His next 3 opponents are Panthers, Eagles, and Falcons. I think there's some value there in terms of an uptick in production.
A Panther, an Eagle, and a Falcon walk into a bar. No, I'm kidding. I agree with that. The Panthers did just sign Eric Reed, the safety from San Francisco, part of the kneeling down protest with Colin Kaepernick. That's what he's mostly known for. But he had a pretty good year. He had a pretty good season or career with the San Francisco 49ers at first-round pick out of LSU. So maybe they'll add addition to the Panthers secondary. Who knows? But it's definitely going to be an interesting game. Interesting to see how they improve with him as their safety and how Odell Beckham Jr. does.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so when we look at it, I mean, any other studs or duds that you want to bring up?
That's a good question.
Cooks had a really good game. Julio
Cooks
had a
has
good
been
game.
a stud.
Golden Tate had a really good game.
I think Cooks is back to Cooks, but I think Cooks is more motivated because he got traded by New England and he wanted to prove him wrong type of thing. I think that's what he's going on. But Kenny Stills has been a pretty dud.
Yeah, Kenny Stills, and he's just always going to be that kind of player that is a shot in the dark. Like if you play daily fantasy and you're like, oh, I could get Kenny Stills because I have like this remaining budget left and he's the best receiver, then you'll take him hoping where he has a game like in week 1 where he had 4 catches, 106 yards, and 2 touchdowns.
You can't ask for that the entire every game.
Exactly. So he's a shot in the dark. Like he's a guy that can do that, but he's like a Ted Ginn, right?
Okay. Well, here's the question: who's breaking out next week?
Ooh.
Any position. Who's your one breakout guy?
God, that is
We're gonna end it right there. We're gonna end it with this opinion.
a breakout player for next week. Let me take a look.
You have 10 seconds. 10.
I'm going to go with Matt Stafford against Green Bay.
Matt Stafford
At
against
home.
Green Bay. I can definitely see that against that secondary. But I am going to counter with looking into the 49ers playing the Cardinals. Matt Breida might have another a breakout game again.
Maybe. He could.
The 0-4 Cardinals, come on. They play terrible. Their defense is terrible.
Yeah.
I
I
think
think
him or George Kittle is going to break out in that.
And I think when we reconvene on Friday,
And that's
we'll
not
have
even
like
like-
a better outlook of the
Yeah,
projections
absolutely.
and like who's playing
But
who.
how I've seen the Cardinals play defense, whoever is going to play them is going to have a breakout game.
I mean, Mike Davis had a really good game.
Exactly
so-
my point.
What about on the flip side, David Johnson? He could have a good game against the Niners.
Yeah, true. But it's mainly the receivers that have breakout games, not running backs when it comes to the 49ers.
That's true.
Like Kareem Hunt had a couple of touchdowns, but they were in like 2 yards out when he played the Chiefs. And this week, Melvin Gordon did have a pretty decent game, granted, but he was mainly part of the passing offense, not the rushing.
Yeah. Cool.
But that is all that we have time for. I want to thank Mark for joining me on this show. He'll be back tomorrow, won't you?
I will.
Great, and we'll be on the we'll be in the fantasy fantasy football won't be until Friday, but we will be here for sports and football as well as basketball, if I'm not mistaken. But again, we will see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.